Hi, and welcome to Something to Talk About. I'm Linda McNamee, and for the next hour, we're going to start thinking about back to school, even though the stores probably started about 6 months ago. Anyway, before I begin, I would like to, let's start by thanking the crew for this evening. We have Chris Flaherty and Corey McNeil, who are staff members here at BCAT, who help keep the place running smoothly and make sure that everything goes off without a hitch. We also have Colleen Moore, Maddie Shipka, Flynn Reardon, and Jolie Atwood, who are volunteers giving up their Wednesday evening missing Olympics, so hopefully their DVRs are set, to come here and help me out. And if you have a question for our wonderful guest this evening, whom you will meet momentarily, you can always give us a call at 781-270-9199. Or if you think of a question after the fact, or if you have a suggestion for a future topic, please feel free to email me at talk@bcattv.org. And one more thank you, last but definitely not least, I would like to thank my husband Paul for staying home for Daddy date night. Hopefully Gwyneth didn't come home from camp too soggy today. So thank you. And now I would like to introduce my wonderful guest for this evening, Dr. Eric Conti, who is the Superintendent of Schools here in Burlington.
I am.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And you're probably not looking forward to September 6th.
No, I
maybe you are.
No, I love it. I love it when the kids come back. The buildings seem very empty without them.
They feel like a ghost town.
Well, it is. It's very busy, as we were talking before the show. It's different work, but when the students come back, they bring a whole different level of energy. It's like it's overwhelming. It's wonderful. And
could bottle some of that energy, you know.
It's true, and the buildings really come to life, and you can it's just a great feeling. So I look forward to the fall every year.
Excellent.
And that Staples commercial always is in my head.
It's
right?
the most wonderful
time of the year.
I haven't seen that yet.
No, not yet. So I'm surprised,
but I do like that song. It's quite appropriate. I love little kids. Anyway, let's back up a little bit. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me, I know you've been on the show before,
Sure.
but believe it or not, I think it's been about 2 years.
Okay, time flies.
But could you tell our audience and me a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and how you got into teaching and administration, mm-hmm. and how you came to Burlington? Well,
I grew up in Arlington, so next town over, and so very familiar with the area, mm-hmm. And my father's still alive and still resides in Arlington, and he was a teacher, and then my mother was, he taught in Wayland Public Schools for 38 years he was a music teacher, and then ultimately the director of fine arts. And then my mother was a teacher as well, and she took some time off to raise my brother and sister and myself, but she taught at St. Catherine's in Porter Square in Somerville.
Oh, okay.
So I basically came from it's a family business, I say. It came from a couple teachers. After college, though, they were initially discouraged me from going to teaching, which I thought was always interesting. And so I was in the private sector. I worked for AT&T. I was in an executive training program.
Okay.
Was in New York City. Was in New Jersey.
Wow.
Doing the business thing, mm-hmm. and really
corporate America.
Yeah, and I felt like I didn't have the meaning that I was mm-hmm. looking for in my work, and so and had really always. I mean, my parents obviously had frustration sometimes that they brought home, but I think...
Well, that kind of comes with every line of work, too.
It does,
not just
and
teaching.
I think that's what I learned, and I think when we talked about work and we talked about education and learning mm-hmm. as we were growing up and sort of saw... I attended high school where my father was a teacher, so I got to sort of see him in father role and then see him in the teacher role.
Now, did you actually have him as a teacher some point?
I did. And
that must have been weird.
That was, and it was probably he got the worst of no. Anyway, it was better for him. I think I was closer. He could keep an eye on me, and I think it worked out. It worked out well in the long run. There was a lot of conflict.
Probably hard going through it at the time.
That led to that decision, but I think it certainly has made us closer
Okay.
over time. So it was, again, very, very positive in the end.
Yeah, but he always knew if you did your homework or not.
Yeah, and other things I was doing, he found out first. So it was always very interesting. But I think that it was interesting where I had to learn that my behavior was more than a reflection of myself. It was also a reflection of my family and a
No
reflection
pressure.
of him. Well, again, I think some of that pressure is okay, and I think that that's one of the lessons that we try to teach all children as they get older is that they represent more than themselves.
It's not all about you.
Right. So I mean, I think that was brought home to me, and it needed to be brought home to me. So I think that worked out. So then I taught actually in Rhode Island initially, and then after Rhode Island, went to Wisconsin to do some graduate work, and then I did some work in Wisconsin, so was familiar with the Wisconsin sort of school systems, and I went back to Massachusetts, and then down to Virginia. I worked for Culpeper County Schools, which is a county in sort of central northern Virginia, and then came back to Burlington 8 years ago. I'm starting year 9 now, so it's been,
I was going to ask you, how long has it been?
Yeah.
Because it'll always just be like 3 or 4 years in my head. Even if you're here for the next 20 years, it'll still be, oh yeah, he just came.
See, in my head, it's like dog years. It feels like 58. No, it's wonderful. So I think if you're going to do this job, which I'm very passionate about, Burlington is a great place to do it in, and I feel like I have a good experience, across 4 states and some different areas.
You've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah. So again, this is a place of choice for me, and so I'm again honored to be here and excited to continue my work here.
Well, I'm happy you're here.
Cool, thank you.
I've heard lots of even before my kids were in school, and as we mentioned earlier, they're starting kindergarten and 2nd grade. But even before then, I've heard amazing things about the school system and how much it has improved since your arrival. So,
and again, I can't speak to the improvement, and what I would say is parents like yourself and children, I think the interaction with the school system is largely through their teachers and their building principals, and I think that's really the strength of Burlington, not the superintendent by any means, but I think we have phenomenal teachers. Again, the work of schools is done in the classroom, and I think that support that principals provide. Every school has just a unique culture, unique feel, and I think kids gravitate towards that, and I think they also help create it. But I think that's when people say they're impressed with Burlington schools or have had a positive experience. From my perspective, it's really about the teachers in the classrooms.
So, okay, I'm gonna come back to my questions just to kind of jump us up. How would you describe the Burlington school system? You did a little bit, but in comparison to like other schools in the area or other schools in Massachusetts, or even in your travels.
Yeah, I think Burlington again has as a community. Public schools really, from my perspective, should represent the values of the community in which they reside. And then my primary job is to really operationalize those values. Okay. So I don't create the values. I think
but it helps if you have, good stuff to work with.
Oh, absolutely. And I think people in my position, I think experience success or sometimes challenges depending on whether their values align with the values of the community in which they serve. So I would say Burlington's values, they're very student focused. I think that they believe in investing in children, and I think they feel that that's a smart investment.
I lived in Florida for a couple of years, and that wasn't the case.
But I think it does pay off. Now it takes some delayed gratification, and I think it's important part of that. I call the sort of that moral contract that that you'll contribute, and then children will sort of learn what they need to learn, and then they'll contribute as they move through. And I think Burlington, I think, from my perspective, sets a fine example of that. So it's hard for me to compare district to district. I don't know a community's values that explicitly. I have some very close colleagues, and I think some of their communities share some of the same values of Burlington. So what I would say is, instead of saying, one's here and one's there, I would just say Burlington is a great reflection of that. And I think that I hope the public schools reflect those values.
Okay, we're jumping around on here, but as you're talking
I'll
about,
do my best.
I'm like the queen of tangents. I'm sorry. So we're talking about the value that the community places on the schools and the educational system of the future of the town. Now, my last guest, we talked about real estate and the real estate market exploding in Burlington. Now, how have the schools kept up? Can the schools keep up with the influx of all the new housing and all the new businesses? And have you seen like an effect that this has had?
I think Burlington's enrollment can be oversimplified in a lot of ways. So I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, and not that it's complex. I just don't want to take up your whole show. So,
well, we could always do a sequel.
Burlington's enrollment has remained relatively steady the last 10 years, at least the 8 or 9 years that I've been here. So the number necessarily hasn't increased significantly.
Okay.
The students making up that enrollment have changed. As the economy has, made some changes, and so we're seeing differences in that. We're seeing an increase in the number of languages spoken in terms of the diversity of students. We're seeing, again, higher levels of students in poverty, family in need. I think the real estate market in Burlington, at least, that's not my area of expertise, but what I've seen is it appears to be a desirable community. People want to be here. I think home values are increasing.
Yeah.
So again, it gets, I think, back to my original point, is I think Burlington always had values that sort of, I think, prioritized the family and children, and I think it was always a great community to do that. And what you hope is that as the housing markets change, as new families come in, that those values don't change, that they want to come in and they're moving to Burlington for those values. And that we'll see what happens. If enrollment increases significantly, we're a public school, all are welcome, and we'll adjust to the enrollment as we go. We're in the middle of a beginning. The school committee had funded, or had requested, the town had funded a 10-year capital plan that in 2006 that just ended in 16, and we're in the process now of doing another 10-year plan. And a big part of that plan is enrollment and demographic projections moving forward. There are experts that look at just what you said, the real estate market, permits, census information, and we try to get a prediction of the enrollment that we'll see over the next 10 years, because you can't just manufacture schools quickly. So you want to at least try to predict the enrollment that you see.
Which kind of leads me into like my next question. When I think capital, I think like new schools, and within the last 10 years, we had a lot of changes to Marshall Simons Middle School. We had a brand new memorial school built. What do you see as some of the changes that might be anticipating? Are we replacing any more schools, or the buildings that we have sufficient expansion?
Again, I think it's sufficient.
How do you plan the future?
Again, sufficient today for the enrollment we have, and then programming is also another part of it. But I think that the changes that we've experienced over the last, again, 8 years, 9 years, have been in the works as a part of that master plan. So we had the buildings evaluated, or the school committee did, prior to my arrival, and I think they had prioritized that Memorial needed to be replaced, and that the middle school needed to be renovated and expanded. And so I think we're just following that plan, and we tend to look at capital expenditures in 10-year blocks of time. So Pine Glen Roof we had talked about. If it has a 30-year warranty and it's approaching the end of its life.
You went to go play in the playground, and my kids are like, "What happened to my school?"
We need
There's big stacks of,
we need to plan that, and I think we have a great Craig Robinson, a very excellent facilities director, and he keeps track of all that. Again, not my area, but I think he's good. He's good. I think there's all different parts of school, and I think people often think of the kids in the classroom, the teacher part of it, which is again the most important part of what we do. But we have close to 1 million square feet under roof.
Wow.
And so that all needs to be cleaned and maintained. Our custodial staff, maintenance staff, again, do an excellent job under Craig's leadership. And we really try to stay on top of things because being a homeowner, that sometimes if you let things go, they can be more expensive in the end.
If you ignore it, it doesn't go away.
It doesn't go away. And then I always tell people, why are summers so busy is, imagine having, at the middle school, 850, 900, teenagers occupy a space. I mean, they make...
Yeah, plus, if they're fixing the roof, you hear the power tools, and kids, at least elementary school children, are relatively easily distracted, and, it impacts their learning.
Yeah, so we have a short window of time during the summer, and we really try to knock off the big projects. And of course, there's ongoing projects as well. But I think, again, our custodial staff working very hard, and our maintenance staff over the summer.
Excellent. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about the public schools. How do you see how popular are parochial school or private school enrollments as far as like Burlington?
Just Linda, before I jump to that, and I won't
sorry.
forget, is you did ask me, and I didn't answer your question. And I apologize. I got
That's
distracted.
okay.
The next project that is being recommended is a renovation of this building. So this building was opened in 1972.
Okay.
So we've submitted a proposal to renovate this building to the State Building Authority, which is a partial partner.
So it's just renovating. It's not like really expanding it.
No. Again, the footprint of this building is fine. Maybe not the design I would choose, but if you're talking about a new high school, our neighbors in Billerica needed a new high school.
That's right,
Wilmington
they're going
is
through
needed a high
that right
school.
now.
So I mean, $170 million easily.
Yeah.
So
not exactly pocket change.
So we're looking at again utilizing the space that we have, renovating some of the internal systems, the heating, air conditioning, sort of redoing science labs because they need to be updated. And that's probably between...
Got to feed the squirrels to like...
Yeah, $30 and $35 million, a project, but we feel in Burlington that would be a way for us to
35
continue.
is still better than 160.
Right, and there's no real buildable, there's not a school lot, so it's not like, Burlington is relatively landlocked, and so it's not like we have a 50, 75 acre parcel that's available either, so we would have to stay in the site. But that's the proposal. So we've been turned down because I think the state on average gets about 100 applicants every year. They typically fund 15. They have a whole priority list. And
Guess so.
We haven't made that list. I think we've been working with Senator Donnelly and Representative Gordon to help plead our case. And again, want to wish Senator Donnelly well while I mentioned him in his recovery. But we're hoping that at some point our high school project will get accepted, and then we can move forward. And then again, the next schools on the horizon would be again Pine Glen and Fox Hill. So we have to decide what to do. Fox Hill, I think, originally opened in the late '60s.
Okay.
And whether they're structurally sound buildings, but whether we want to maintain them, or depending on the enrollment projections and everything else, do we make other...
You can't really predict,
do we make other building
enrollments
decisions?
in 10 years.
And the town is undergoing a master planning process itself, which is great. And so they're looking at different needs, across town. So really, obvious, my first responsibility is to the schools and to the school committee and to children. But in Burlington, again, another value which I really appreciate is we really work well together across town. So if there's a, I've heard rumors about, do we go from 4 elementaries to 3, and then just create a larger, and then that site at Pine Glen might maybe become usable land for something else. There's so many different permutations, right? So, but I think that we're committed to all working together to try to solve that as best we can. And I think that, again, the master planning process the town is doing is very important. And I think that our planning...
I think you need more than 3 months in the summer to plan all of this.
Well, again, it's ongoing. The joke is, right, you're building the airplane as you're flying it. So that's the...
I like that analogy.
It
works.
Analogy, yes.
Okay.
So parochial schools and
or
private
not necessarily
schools?
Private schools versus public schools. And hey, let's throw homeschooling in there.
Okay.
while we're at it?
I think those
Now,
choices.
do you get the statistics on how many kids are not in Burlington Public Schools that live in Burlington?
I get some of those statistics. I'm
Okay.
not sure I get everyone for private school. I
Okay.
would see the kids in the numbers of kids in the census, so I might not know the exact
okay.
students. Many students start in a public school and then maybe go to a private school, so we
Okay.
would certainly know, again, where the student started and,
Okay.
and that they left. Most receiving schools, just like if we receive a child, they would ask for their academic records, so we would have
okay.
sort of that information. And homeschool students actually are still required to go through a process with the local public schools. So,
Okay.
so we do have interaction with our children who are homeschooled. So, again, we have students attending all of the above. So we
Okay.
have students attending private schools, and what I always say is I think choices are good, and choices are good for families, and you parents need to make that choice for their children first and foremost, and try to pick the environment where they can be most
Right.
successful in. I think that we do it well. I think we can be a viable option. Do I think we can serve every single kid all the time? Clearly that's we haven't done that, and so I mean I think open to that, but I don't place a value judgment on where kids go to school, because we're always there, and we're
Right.
always there as a fallback. So even if a child attempts private school
Okay.
and then it doesn't work out, they're always welcome back here in Burlington in their public school. That's our mission. Homeschooling, you asked me for numbers, and I think we have a handful,
Okay.
and again, my thoughts are if that's what's best for the child from the family's perspective, our job is to support that.
I'm like, no, get my kid, take my kids, please take my kids.
Yes, support that as
I love them
as
dearly,
best we
but
can. So I again appreciate a family that wants to homeschool and take that on, and again, our job is to try to support them as best we can, and we're always an option for that. So for that child, and so I don't again view it as a loss. I like again I like learning about those choices. I like thinking of public schools as not sort of a guarantee.
you just don't want to live in a bubble. You want to see what else is out
Well,
there.
I think it forces us to stay on top of our game too. We want to have a good
That's
product,
true.
and then we want
Okay.
people to choose us, and so I look at that all the time, and I want to make sure that we're a positive place. Now, does that mean again every family, every child successful here? The answer is no, but we keep track of the students again who are leaving, why they're leaving. I've had some conversations with some families and asked how well are the kids prepared and adjusted to those experiences. So I just think like any organization, if you were losing customers or losing people, you would want to know
Yeah.
why and
Yeah.
how you could improve. So that's sort of the private school part. Again, the homeschooling part tends to be again a much more personal family decision. And it's different in every state, so that's what I would say. And the regulations and the state laws are very different in every
okay.
state. So when I was in Virginia, county-based system, so it'd be like Middlesex County schools, so
Okay.
much larger. And homeschooling, because it was very rural, was much more popular. So we probably
Right.
had 200 to 300 students who were homeschooled, and we had a whole curriculum and coordination, and we really tried to work with the families.
Kind of like the culture of the community.
Yeah, absolutely.
almost.
And again, so it's not a value judgment on my part, and we're here to help all children be educated, no matter what our role is.
Speaking of that,
Mm-hmm.
again, I don't have personal experience, but it's from what I've heard. I have seen that there has been a lot of testing in schools. Not just the big MCAS, but measuring, the benchmarks. But on the flip side, there's the IEP students, the individualized educational plan students, and let's teach the kids, the kids are individuals. So how do you find that balance between the individualized educational plan and standardized tests? And how much testing really needs to get done?
Okay, so that's-
Yeah, I know this could be a whole series in itself, but the 5-cent version.
Right, the 5-cent version. Well,
Maybe 10.
I make a distinction in my head, and it's it's more than a semantic argument to me between testing and assessment. So I think anytime a teacher is working with a child, I think they're constantly assessing
Okay.
that child. When they're having a conversation, they're really sort of making an assessment. And I think, so assessment happens constantly.
Right.
You know, from my perspective, a lot of the testing that people talk about are I would call assessments, and that's where we check in. So if we're looking at a particular skill, number facts, we need to, sometimes it's called probing. We need to say, okay, you know, does this child know their number facts? And that probe could take a minute. And is that a test? I mean, technically you could say it is, but from my perspective, an assessment is something teachers do all the time. It can be formal, it can be informal, and it really helps them adjust their instruction, because you really want to personalize instruction as much as you can to the individual child's needs. Standardized testing, state testing, large-scale testing, from my perspective, has a very different purpose. Tends not to be focused on student growth or student teaching, because we don't get the results back quickly enough to make adjustments. I think those assessments are helpful in looking at curricular alignment, sort of opportunity. I think there are other, you know, maybe outside organizations want to see how individual students perform on a large-scale test. But again, I think they have a different purpose. You mentioned individual education plans, and I don't really connect them to testing too much. Individual education plans, from my perspective, are all about access. And again, I think we're a public school system. And I think what's wonderful, and it hasn't always been the case, actually for decades, children with disabilities were excluded from participating in public schools. So as the federal law changed, I think the individual education plan is about allowing all kids to access our curriculum. And that can be from disabilities that are clearly visible and sort of plain to see and everyone is accepting of, to disabilities that manifest themselves in very tricky ways, different ways. And but from my perspective, it has, again, nothing to do with assessment. It's more to do with access and equity. And I think the conversations with my father, again, teacher for 38 years, when we've discussed how schools have changed, because one part of him argues there's nothing new in schools, and I would sort of argue some of that as well.
Well, Dad.
Well, we changed the acronyms, and again, I think a lot of things you know, get recycled and come back. But I think a fundamental change in public education has been the redefining of equity. So what my father's day, what he would say is, you know, every child has the same experience, and the children who are most successful rise to the top, and that's equity. So equity is the same experience. I think in today's world,
kind of like Darwin, you know, survival of the fittest, kind of.
And
I know I'm oversimplifying.
No, that's perfect. And I think in equity today is about defining a standard. So we want all kids to have this level of proficiency. And then what equity is today is getting all children to that level of proficiency. So some may take twice as long, some might need support, some might need everything. So not everyone has the same experience anymore. And so a lot of people, that gets to their idea of fairness, especially people of my dad's generation. Oh, that's not fair. This child had extra help. But again, it's not the experience that's meant to be equitable anymore. It's the outcome that's meant to be equitable, and that's part of the change in policy. So again, that's...
Well, I'm also thinking curriculum, you know, I've never met your dad, but I'm thinking, you know, when I went to school, which is about 38 years ago, in kindergarten, we were focusing on learning our shapes and our colors. And in my daughter's kindergarten class, they were writing, you know, full journals, you know, complete sentences. So it's like the standard seems to be, or the expectation seems to be that much greater now.
Yeah, and I'd say I'm not sure I agree with all of the expectations that are set, and I do think...
Well, you don't have any control over that, though.
No, but I think, again, what we do have control over, I feel like, is how we go about doing that, and I think in Burlington, we really try to make sure that there's reasonableness and well-roundedness that goes with that experience. So it's, yes, the expectations have increased, but we still want or recognize that learning is a joyous experience, or should be. And so I think
Should be.
and I think so our teachers are very committed to keeping that joy in the classroom and doing the best we can. You know, we often get around to test scores and Burlington's performance, and I think that the large-scale average test scores that people largely reflect on are more indicative or more highly correlated to characteristics or qualities in the community, like parent education and sort of individual family income. What we look for is growth, you know, where a student comes in and where they leave us. And but I also think we don't necessarily, you know, maybe not in agreement with everyone in the community, put all of our eggs in that basket.
Right.
So we want to recognize many different forms of success. And I think by doing so, again, hopefully recognizing the whole child, allowing more students to experience some success, those who are academically, you know, focused, and maybe others who have other strengths. We all have, as I always say, we're all perfectly flawed, right? We're all, you know,
Well, there's like that little cartoon about, you know, measuring success, and you have all these little animals, like an elephant and a giraffe and a fish and a monkey, and it's like, okay, whoever could climb the tree is successful.
Right.
And it's like, well, you know, fish can't climb trees, so does that mean they're a failure? You know, that kind of visualization.
So again, in terms of curriculum, in terms of that experience, I think we do try to allow for students to participate and to have some success.
Cool. Okay, loaded question coming up. Recently, the schools went through the whole accreditation debate. Now, I'm kind of separate from the whole thing because reading the news just scares me, so I like to be blissfully ignorant. But I remember when I was in high school and applying to colleges, it's like you must be from an accredited school. But with the debate that went on whether or not Burlington should be accredited, that didn't seem to be that standard of measurement. Like you had to be an accredited school, because we were thinking about not going through the accreditation process. So what are the pros and cons of each? Because we did end up getting accredited, correct?
Yeah, and we're fully accredited now. I think the word accredited has again lots of meanings across different states, and so it can be very confusing. I think the accreditation process that we go through is through a group of really my colleagues and my peers, and what it is, it's a voluntary peer review. So you invite people who have expertise to come into your school. This organization has a set of standards, and then they rate you based on those standards. So I think it's an important process. I think that several years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, many of my colleagues, including myself, felt like the process was getting too formulaic and too prescriptive. So they weren't encouraging innovation. If they came in and didn't recognize something, or a school was doing something a little bit differently, you might have not been rated particularly well. So we were asking them as a group to rethink their standards, to be a little bit more flexible, and that was the process that we went through. And there was some, as with any organization, there was some politicking, negotiating that was going back and forth with that group. And I honestly feel like I contributed to a lot of the anxiety, because I did a very poor job communicating, you know, the intention, my intention, what was going on. And I think that that caused some of the confusion and some of the anxiety. And then, so I take full responsibility for that. I think, again, the intention is always to do what's best for kids. The intention was to try to have the accreditation process be a little bit more flexible and modernized, up to date, because again, we are. It's almost like a collaborative. So we go out on the visits and we evaluate other schools, and we invite people into our school to.
It's got to be hard to be objective, though, if you're going to a different school system, because you have to be kind of partial to your own.
But I think that's why the standards are so important. So I'll try to give you a concrete example. Like they would say, high schools need to have an advising program. And so one of the issues that we had is in the former process, it was only one particular type of advising program that they would
Okay.
want to see. So there are many very successful high schools, or even, again, Burlington High School, that had created their own advising system
Okay.
where there was a lot of student-to-student advising, which was
Oh,
great.
okay.
And I think
But
it's
it
a very
didn't
positive
fit in the
thing.
cookie cutter
Right,
mold
so
of
we were
the
just asking them to be a
standards.
little bit more flexible. And again, I think I
okay.
could have presented, again, our intent much more clearly, and so I do understand why people were very anxious about, again, being unaccredited or taking on an accreditation.
Well, because there were probably a lot of people like me that were thinking of their definition of accreditation back from their experiences and when they were in school. And
Well, again, and
knowing.
the process
Yeah.
has always been voluntary.
Right, okay.
But again, most high schools do it. So if
Okay.
you don't do it, I think people
Okay.
are asking, why? And so I think that was again a big
Okay.
question. And people in Burlington said, well, most schools do.
and then
Why
what
not us?
happens? Yeah.
And then again, I didn't really
What happens if you
explain that well. But our diplomas were, again, always valid. And this agency, this really has no bearing on our ability to grant diplomas.
Okay.
So in other states, their Department of Education formally accredits their program. It's not the language of Massachusetts, but I think it causes lots of confusion in policy. But we're on the other side of that now. I think the accreditation process has been updated. I think we meet regularly. And again, what's interesting is they're an organization that actually is housed, or they have office space in Burlington.
Oh,
So they're a
okay.
neighbor of ours, and we have been meeting regularly with the Department of Education and the State Superintendent's Association and
Cool.
Reading Public Schools, and we're going through this in a much more collaborative and I think forward-thinking way. And so once everyone sort of cooled down and we listened, I think
I guess I'm behind the eight ball
I
on
think
that.
there's a lot of positives going on. So again, the high school's fully accredited at this point, and now they're going through an updated process this coming year.
Cool.
And then we look forward to sort of staying in this partnership moving forward.
Thank
So,
you.
And again, had I done a better job, I think we probably
I did not
would have.
mean to place blame. I just,
No,
I'm oblivious.
I'm
so
taking blame for that. So I think, again, I think there was a lot of confusion, and I think I could have clarified things much more clearly.
okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So moving on to something a little lighter,
Mm-hmm.
a little more local. We're getting close to back to school.
Mm-hmm.
It's in less than a month now. What are we talked about the capital improvements like the new roof on Pine Glen and elements. What elements are going to be new this year? What are there going to be any new surprises for students?
Well, I think curriculum always evolves, so there'll be
Okay.
some evolving curriculum, and I think some specific examples of that. We have the next generation science standards that were adopted in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So,
I remember talking to Ms. Pavlicek about
yeah,
that.
Wendy
So
and Sean.
is that being implemented
Yeah,
this year?
gradually,
Wow.
but not all at once. I think there'll
Okay.
be some implemented this year, some next, but we're transitioning to the next
Okay.
generation science standards. So some students, especially elementary students, will begin to experience new activities
Okay.
related to those standards. So that's one thing. And again, what goes away when that happens is the older curriculum sort of goes away.
Get
and
rid
so
of the
that was,
textbooks from 1972.
and I think that's part of it. I
Okay.
think we are spending a lot of time. The state actually adopted voluntary, which means they're not mandated, standards in digital literacy and computer science. So the
Ooh,
state has
that sounds cool.
a real need for students or future workers who have a background in computer science, so they're really encouraging
Okay.
school districts to do that. We have a great computer science teacher here at the high school at Bernardsick, and she's revamping the computer science curriculum, so we're hoping to see more enrollment and more activity there.
Cool.
I think the high school has added a graduation requirement now where they're asking students to participate. It's not a full course. I just think it's so many hours in terms of digital citizenship and digital literacy.
Okay, what does that mean?
That means it's almost like driver's ed now for
Okay.
the internet, and saying, some of
Okay.
the
Because I would think they'd kind of have to know that by default because aren't all the high school students like using iPads for everything?
yes, and we've done a lot of that teaching up really from elementary school through
Okay.
middle school. We're just sort of formalizing it now, so I
okay.
don't think it's necessarily new content, but I think by making it a graduation requirement, I think we're really
Okay.
stressing it's very important, and I think what ultimately we're trying to give is a positive message, because
Okay.
people often, you only hear the cautionary tale of, once it's online, it's there forever. But we're also telling kids that once it's online, it's there forever. Why can't it be a positive story? Why can't
Right.
it be advocacy that you're
Right.
involved in? Why can't it be a passion of yours? Why can't it be your best
Okay.
work? So again, if that's going to be your digital footprint, if that's going to be in today's world,
How do you want to be seen to the rest of the
everyone's a digital
world?
citizenship.
Okay.
It's really it's a part of yourself that you have to think about now, and I think that's what we're trying to.
Okay. I'm still learning all this new terminology myself. So thank you for taking the time to explain that.
And I am as well. So I'm a learner. I'm a learner here as we move along. So, so that's.
It kind of leads me into my next question too, because it's like, okay, we've been using
right. And just one other quick thing,
Oh,
and
yep.
then because we can talk about I think the iPads is we're working on with the Burlington Police Chief Kent a new security protocol. So we're going to be introducing
Oh.
a new security protocol this
Okay.
year, and I think it's going to simplify our communication not only within the buildings, but I think with parents as well. So I think
Okay.
we're going to be
Like
introducing that
when
at the
schools
school
are on
committee.
lockdown or
Yeah, so
that
even
kind of?
defining what it is,
Okay.
code blue, relaxed code blue. I think people are confused. What does that
Okay.
mean? What's the situation? And so the police have been researching protocols that I think are research based that make more sense.
Okay.
And I think they've reached sort of a recommendation, and
Cool.
we're going to be implementing that. So that's going to be discussed at the school committee meeting in August. So prior to
okay.
the start of school, and then really in the fall, we'll be introducing a new security protocol.
Okay.
So, and it's all about.
So it's
the
like opening
language.
up the lines of communication with.
Well, right, because there's always that balance. What do you share and what don't you share, right?
Right.
You don't want to share your security plans with people, but then most parents say, I want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
So we struggle with that a little bit. And then I think.
Especially now that most kids have cell phones and they're calling their parents saying, oh, by the way, we're on lockdown, and the parents are going, what's going on,
Right.
especially when you turn on the news.
And then the research has changed as well. And sadly, I
Okay.
think there is research into this, which I wish there weren't, but I'm saying
wish there didn't need to be,
It didn't need to
yeah.
be, but I think we're taking it very seriously. So I think in a lot of the recommendations we had, prior to the age that we currently live
Okay.
in, is to be very cryptic in how you talk about the situation, and I think that can lead to some frustration. And so I
Okay.
think where we're sort of moving and where the research is taking us now is just to, I think, to simplify and to clarify some of the communication. So I'm, again, very positive about it. The police have been always awesome in Burlington. Chief Kent, his staff are fantastic, real partners with the school. And I'm excited to clarify this, and I hope, again, it improves communication and moving
Okay.
forward. So I just
Because
wanted
I'm
to add
also
that.
thinking, just as you're talking, I'm thinking about how do I explain this to my 5-year-old at home that he is going to be going through these, lockdown drills and, hide in the closet or, go in the bathroom and, hide yourself. And it's like, how do you tell them without freaking them out? I mean, is that covered in the schools, or is that the parent responsibility, or
No,
both?
our teachers
or-
do a great job
Okay.
of doing that, and I think they do it contextually based on the age of the, age of the kids, and again, it's not to create panic. It's just really becomes part of the routine of school, and I think when you have so many kids in a small space, sometimes people think routine is a pejorative term, but it's really not. You need structure. You need to have routines in order for the day to function. So I think it just becomes a part of that.
And also, having it in the
day.
school setting, it's like, okay, this is what we do at school.
Right.
Whereas if it's, a parent individually talking to a child, the parent comes with preconceived notions that already exhibit panic
Yeah.
or fear.
So I think Again, this new protocol will
Okay.
involve obviously training the adults in school, creating those routines with kids. Many of the routines exist already, and this is just going to be overlaying sort of a new
Oh, okay.
communication, a new way of communicating. And I think a lot of the training then will be expanded to parents as well. So
Okay.
I think, again, that's what I think one of the things that Chief Kent and his officers felt was very positive about this particular
Now, is it
protocol.
rolling out across the school system, or is it going to start with the high school and then trickle down? Or?
No, we're going to roll it out across. And
Okay.
then what's interesting is I think the police are also recommending the same language for businesses in town.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's really about a community effort to create a
Okay.
common language. So it just would allow for, I think, more clarity in terms of a particular situation. And it's, again, one of those
Sounds good.
protocols we hope to never use, but I think we're following the direction of the police in this, and they've been, again, as I said, they've been fantastic.
Excellent. Okay, back to technology.
Yes.
So, pretty much everybody uses an iPad now,
Mm-hmm.
in like from preschool all the way up to high school. How long has that program of, you know, doing everything on an iPad, how long has that been in place now, roughly?
Again, we don't do everything on the iPad. I think that's
Okay.
sort of a, again,
Okay, I'm thinking this from, you know,
misunderstanding.
what I see with my first grader and
Yeah.
what I hear about high school.
yeah,
know.
again, I think
Is it a successful program? It seems to be with the whole electronic footprint or digital
again,
footprint.
I'll go back to your elephant, giraffe, and fish sort
Okay.
of, again, is it successful? What impact did it have? What I would say is the iPad or a web-enabled device, a computer, a Chromebook, whatever you want to say,
Okay.
is a tool that exists in 2016 that our children should be capable and I think are quite interested in using. I think that tool, there's no magic to it. I still think it needs to be planned and operated.
It needs to be a tool. It doesn't need to be
Right, so
like the-
again, it still has to be a tool that's in the hands of a very expert teacher, and then she needs to create a curriculum that works. And I think it needs to be a part of that. So there are appropriate times for it to be used. There are times when it should be put away. Again, kids are still in books, kids are still using glitter glue, kids are still getting messy.
glitter.
All those things exist. I think that the misperception about the device, and it's not a passive device, so it's not a TV. So people often talk about screen time, and I'd be very wary of screen time. And I'm not someone who says kids need to be on these devices all the time. But it's different screen time than on a TV when you're passively sitting and absorbing. When used well, and I think many of our teachers use it exceptionally well, it really becomes a creation device. And so that's the power of it, is when it's used as a creation device. If you take a
And teaching the kids how to use it interactively as opposed to.
yeah, and many times the kids are teaching us, or they're using that, they're using the tool they're very comfortable with to again create knowledge. So I'm saying that's when it's appropriate, and it allows for a level of personalization for each individual kid that I think is very powerful. It does allow for some instant feedback for some of our students. So instead of filling out a worksheet incorrectly and then having to wait for the teacher to correct, again, there are some real positives, but again, it still has to be appropriate, still has to be used in conjunction with a well-designed lesson, and I think it works well. And I keep and I see it being used. So it's is it successful? We'll see some see some different things.
Seems to be
And then,
working.
but if students are tracing letters on a chalkboard or tracing letters on an iPad, what's they're creating. They can project their work up on, they call it the jumbotron, the screen, the camera in the classroom. They can be more engaged. And
do all of the schools have the big magic whiteboard
yeah, I think they all have.
or jumbotrons?
Yeah, they all have interactive projectors, and
Okay.
so I think they use all the schools have wireless, and I think that's the vehicle for delivering the signals. And I think we're sort of evolving to more of a where it's really not about the board in the front of the room; it's more about a distributed learning environment. But I think most classrooms, if not all classrooms, students can project their work from their device, if that's where the work is taking place. Again, there's still lots of crayons, there's still lots of construction paper, there's still fine motor skills.
You still need to use how to use scissors, or as my daughter does the scissors with the left hand. So.
You know, all that's taking place. So I think it's a tool that's appropriate for 2016, and I think, you know, I don't think we ever expected there to be, you know, magic with any learning device. I still think the magic comes between the relationship between
how
a
you use
teacher
the tool.
and kids. So
It's meant to be a tool. It's not meant to be a substitute or surrogate
no.
instructor. Okay. Now, wait, hold on. Okay. I'm looking at my notes because we only have a few minutes left. Now for a couple more questions. We talked earlier about working with the police department for the communication system in the event of an emergency. What kind of communication systems are in place for regular communication? What's going on in the school, you know, school lunch, notes to class, blizzard bag. We won't go into blizzard bags right now, but, you know, what is the preferred method of communication between the schools and
the preferred method, honestly, is what works. So I think we have to offer multiple ways of communication, and I think that's one of those questions where you can never communicate enough, right? So I think there's not ever a time when we say, oh, we've done all we can. So many people like
little implants back.
Many people like face-to-face, and I think people are always welcome in our schools. I think there's many conversations that occur face-to-face. I think telephone, communicating with your child's teacher is still, again, very prevalent. Email, again, very prevalent, and I think the vast majority of communication is typically between parent and teacher directly, or student and teacher directly, depending on the age. And so I think that's always appropriate. I think school news, I think many of our teachers have classroom, instead of a classroom newsletter, they have a classroom electronic presence, a blog or something like that parents can subscribe to. So it's not even something that you have to actively check every day. If there's new material posted, you can get notified. You can open it if you want or not. So I think the tools that we have in the internet today allows sort of that active communication and push out of information. Same thing with schools. I think most of our principals have, again, a presence. The schools have a presence or a Facebook page. Again, they can post content, school lunches, all that other things. I think we have to make sure that our content stays accurate and relevant, and that takes time. And so we're all learning, you know, how to do that better. But I think the intention is always
with all the other million things that you have to do every day.
But I mean, more avenues of communication. I think we don't rely solely on that, you know, on the digital. I still think that the most effective communication is sort of a face-to-face or a telephone conversation for many of the challenges that we have. But again, we're trying to seek as many options, you know, as we can. And the example I use is, you know, snow day communication. Again, a critical piece of information.
Look out the window if you can move your car.
But I'm saying, I think a long time ago, I remember waiting for the radio, right, to say that. And we still use the radio, and then we still use now the news stations. But I have to say the fastest way typically is, you know, I'll talk to Patrick at 4:35 in the morning, and if he tweets it out, you know, the kids are...
5 o'clock should only come once a day, and that's not the one.
That's not the one. But so the kids, that might be the kids' preferred method. So again, I hope
You're
that
having a little message on my answering machine at 5:30
and I'm still making telephone calls. So I'm saying, I think we're trying to, you know, cover everything. I don't think there's a magic way to do that. I think I try to use my blog, which is funny. I was much more... my blog 7 or 8 years ago was one of the first or the first, and so content was people were going to it, I think just because of the novelty of it. And what's now is we've become so specialized, no one really wants to read, you know, the boring stuff I put on. They want to see their children and their teachers. So again, I do have some subscribers.
We want to see the glitter glue.
And I try to you know, add
Yeah.
content that's relevant,
Okay.
and then people who are interested in that content then can subscribe and get notified. So I think that's this is a form of communication, right? So
Absolutely.
we're always trying to communicate. We are introducing a again, it's a new tool. I'm not sure how successful it'll be, but some of my colleagues have had some success last year, so we're going to try it. It's called it's a Let's Talk button, and
Okay.
it's going to be.
Where is this button found?
Well, it's going to be present on all of our sort of web pages as we
Oh,
do redesign.
okay,
And
all right.
it may be even.
Okay.
It may be topical, or it could even be personal. And what I like about it is it will direct the comment to the person who's sort of in charge of that, and then it allows us to keep track of response time, whether it was
Wow.
resolved. And I also think it allows, what I like is allows for the questioner to even compliment something, because again, in our business, typically a job well done gets greeted with silence, and then maybe
Yeah,
someone
exactly.
wants to.
Yeah, the whole no news is good news thing.
Right,
But it's
but
nice
maybe-
to be recognized
Maybe
once in a
somebody
while.
wants to put a compliment in, or again, teacher did a great thing. So what does this mean? For instance, we are going to be discussing for this whole year high school start times, right? So we're going to say we're doing that as a league, so that's going to
Okay.
be a conversation. We may, again, have lots of face-to-face conversations, lots of meetings, but there may be a high school start time button on this Let's Talk, where we
Okay.
would post our information, maybe our presentations, maybe minutes from some of the meetings that we have,
Okay.
and then allow people to make their comments and make either compliments, say, I don't
Okay.
like this, I like this, and then we would be able to keep track of that in a certain way. So it's new, we're trying it, but as with any communication, again, we're looking to improve it, expand it, and then make it effective, and if it doesn't work out, then we'll always try something else.
Wow. That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we covered pretty much everything. Yeah, there's still a couple of things, but we only have like a minute left. So I do want to start wrapping things up. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.
I always like learning about stuff because I don't, you know, I'm one of those people that you hate because I don't go onto all of the blogs and everything. So I like the face-to-face communication.
I don't hate that at all, so
Okay.
that happens to be my preferred method
So
as well.
Thank you very much. Best of luck
Thank you.
to you in the coming year,
Yeah.
because things are unpredictable. Well, relatively predictable, but unpredictable. You never know what happens when you get a room full of children.
We're very excited.
And I also want to thank everyone at home this evening for tuning in. I hope you found our conversation as interesting and as educational as I did. And enjoy the rest of your summer. See you around town. Good night. Oh, that's loud. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.